Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Town of Mooresville agenda briefing on July 2nd, 2020. I think that Barbara will be calling in, but everybody else is on the line. Commissioner West will not be joining us. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started if everybody's ready. Next slide, please. Okay, we have two presentations. We have a presentation for the Mooresville Youth Council, and then there's a proclamation that needs to be read. Is there anybody that'd like to read that proclamation?
I will, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Right.
Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Compton. That's great. Moving on to adjustments to the agenda. If you go back to, if you do look at the adjustments, we're adding the proclamation, and then also if you look at 4A on the consent, there's been a revision made there as well. So we'll go ahead and go to consent items. For the consent agenda, if you take a look at consent items A through D, any comments or questions? A through D. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. Consent items 5E through 5H. 5E through 5H. Any comments or questions?
Mayor.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Qualls?
Item, 5F, could we pull that? And I'd like to have more discussion with the town manager in regards to this.
Okay. Any other comments from commissioners?
I think that was the one I wanted to pull, get a little bit more information on that also. Okay.
Very good. We'll go ahead and pull that item and have that conversation with the town manager. Mr. Heyman, is there any problem with that in terms of pulling it and adding it later? Is there a timing concern there? You're on mute, I think. You're still on mute.
Thanks. No, sir. It's, it's something, Tiffany's got some reasons why she wants to do that. I had asked her to actually be prepared to present that. If you want to hear any comments about that from her today, or we can pull it, put it on later.
What would y'all like to do? Pull it and have a discussion offline?
Yes, I think that'd be the best thing. Perhaps at our 3-on-3 meetings or another conversation with Tiffany and the manager.
Okay, sounds great, guys.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Consent items 5E through 5H.
Mayor, I would like a little clarity on, make sure there's no issue with number G, 5G. Any conflict of interest, anything on that?
Can you elaborate on that? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, idea help, right?
Uh-huh.
Is that not you an employee of that company?
Yes, it sure is.
I just don't want to see a lawsuit with some other health company coming forward with it. I just wanted a little clarity on it.
And what kind of clarification would you like?
I just want to make sure there's no conflict of interest there.
Okay. Ms. Crawford, is that something you'd like to address about a conflict of interest? Employer?
Sure. And I think Tiffany can elaborate a little bit more on the terms of this contract, but as far as a conflict, unless it would be a substantial direct financial interest to Mr. Atkins, I don't think that there would be a conflict there.
All right, I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure that we don't step in something with other companies, health companies saying might be some conflict there. So I'm good with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So, I mean, to tag on to Commissioner Houston's question, do we, send out an RFP for this, or how do we do that? I mean, I know that this has been our provider for a number of years. I just didn't know when or if there's ever opportunity for other companies to bid on that service.
I'll ask Tiffany to chime in on that one if y'all don't mind.
Sure. So I was actually going to mention this when Commissioner Houston spoke. Last year, we actually embarked on a RFP process and identified several vendors that had interest in working with us. And because of the added features with Growth 365 and the presentation of the wonderful opportunities that the IRL Health staff could provide to us, we decided to go ahead and renew with them last year, but we did put out the bid last year.
Any other comments or questions regarding consent item G? Okay, we'll move on. Consent items 5I through 5L. Comments or questions, 5I through 5L. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. Comments or questions, 5M through 5P. Comments or questions, 5M through 5P. Okay, we'll move on. Consent items Q through T. Q through T. Okay, hearing none. We'll go to the regular agenda, and our first agenda item is 6A, appointments to the Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Compton.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we had a great meeting with Commissioners Houston and Qualls to vet these and go through them. I want to send my thanks out to Jen for the book, the 3-ring binder she put together. All the applications are in it. It was easy to go through. We appreciate the staff comments and recommendations. We relied heavily on that also, and it gave us a good opportunity to go through and talk to some of these applicants to work it through. But I think Commissioner Qualls had talked to the other commissioners who weren't on this committee, weren't involved with this, to make sure they had any questions or get their approval on it. So I believe it's pretty much clear cut and self-explanatory in what's in our packet. If anybody has any questions, Commissioners Houston, Qualls, or myself, be glad to answer.
Hearing none, Commissioners, if you'd be agreeable, if we could read the slate of appointments and make one motion for the entire slate after they're read, if y'all are agreeable to that, as opposed to doing each board.
I think that's what we've done in the past.
Okay,
Just it runs smoother that way. I think with all of us in agreement, staff's okay, our board's okay, you're okay, then I think that's what we've done in the past. It's just one general motion in a second.
Okay, great, thank you. And just
that's okay.
Jen did a lot of work putting these books together, and I know she'd like to reuse these books and just update them since these applications are good for 2 years. So if everybody Monday night could please bring your binders back so that she can reuse them for next year, that'd be great. I know she'd appreciate that. We'll move on to next agenda item, which is award a contract for Kaleidoscope Group. That's agenda item 6B.
Yes. Good morning, everyone, again. I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss the water contract to the Kaleidoscope Group to assist us in the implementation of our diversity, and equity strategic plan. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about the process for selecting them. So we did put out an RFP in April with a May 19th deadline. We received 3 complete responses at that time. All of those responses were then forwarded to the Diversity Advisory Committee for review. Once we had finished reviewing them, we met as a committee and decided to conduct exploratory interviews via WebEx with 2 of the finalists. Once we had done that, We then collected feedback and vetted the selected vendor, the Kaleidoscope Group, through a reference checking process. And so we conducted reference checks for 3 of their references with some standardized questions. And a lot of their references were actually government entities. They've worked with the city of New York, they've worked with Nashville, Tennessee, the city of Evanston. And so we felt that they had an added advantage over the other finalists in the fact that they've worked in the local government space. Next slide, thank you. So some of the general objectives that we hope to accomplish within the first 3 to 6 months would be first, for the Kaleidoscope Group to assess, through talking to the committee members and other key stakeholders, reviewing our policies and people practices and reviewing our strategic plan, kind of where we are as a town on our journey. They'll also be making any revisions or enhancement recommendations to our strategic plan as part of this process in determining the strategy with which we'll employ and execute our plan. Once we've made any enhancements to the plan, the Kaleidoscope Group will guide us through developing our measurement scorecard. That scorecard will assist us in determining our progress on our stated goals. Now, I'm just making these numbers up as an example, but if we stated that over the next 3 to 5 years, we wanted to increase diversity at the supervisor level or above by 40%, this scorecard would help us track our progress and see if we've met that goal within the time frame. The exact quantitative goals and the methods of measurement will be determined with the expert opinion of the Kaleidoscope Group. However, some of our goals will also be qualitative and may be measured through opinion polls or surveys. Simultaneously with all of this, the Kaleidoscope Group will provide coaching and development to our committee. All of those who are on the committee, which is currently comprised of 8 members, are there because they have a passion for making this an inclusive work environment. But it doesn't mean that we all had experience serving on these types of committees or doing this type of work. So the committee will work with the Kaleidoscope Group as they assist us in making sure that we are all well prepared to move on to the next phase. In addition, they'll help guide and advise us on the structure of the committee and with some guiding questions such as, in an organization of our size, would it be best to have more members? What is the best way to go about recruiting additional members? And questions like this. Okay, we can move on. Okay. So as we move on to the next phase, which will be 6 months and onward, things will start taking shape around our education and training initiatives. So they would work with us to develop and implement an education roadmap. It'd be a tool that prepares the town internal stakeholders to fulfill all of our roles in helping achieve success. It really would be determining and plotting out the types of trainings that are needed at every level of the organization. So we may find that there is some training that would be required across the board, but we will also know that each level of the organization has a unique perspective on the journey, and education will need to be equally unique at the leadership, management, supervisory, and staff levels. And some trainings may vary even within those levels. In addition to that, there will be a train-the-trainer component with sessions and materials. So they'll leave us in a place to be able to carry on with these training and education initiatives after we've ended our engagement with them. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So another major component of our strategic plan is recruitment and retention. So while we're working on the training and education, we'd also be looking at these items. And so, after completing the items that we identified in part 1 of this presentation, reviewing the structure of the committee, reviewing our strategic plan, making any enhancements, we can begin the work of reviewing and assessing our recruitment and retention policies and practices. So we'll continue to work to ensure that we are tapping into the right spaces for recruitment, using vacancy announcements that make it clear about what our perspective is on diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity, and that it's truly interwoven into everything we do to diversify and support our staff as a part of looking at our broader policies as well, to make sure we're applicable, obviously, that they demonstrate our desire to ensure that all who work here feel welcome and included. So it moves into a broader discussion of overall inclusivity. Okay. So I anticipate that obviously initially in the first year or so, we'd be working on some of those major items. And if we got to the end of the year, as you know, the original Visions contract was a 4-year contract that actually completed about a year and a half of work. So at the end of this fiscal year, we'd be at year 3. And if we decided to engage with the Kaleidoscope in year 4, we'd just kind of be continuing on to ensure, using them as a partner, that we have, fully implemented our plan and that, we have created, a space and environment with which to further our goals. I will take any questions or comments. Okay.
Any comments or questions for Ms. Shelley?
Mayor.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Houston?
I just appreciate you moving forward with this, but could you give me a list of who's on that committee?
Absolutely. So I can provide it to you in writing, but I can also tell you now. So Violet Carter, Director Generalist, is currently on the committee. Patricia Crump, who is a police officer, is on the committee. John Finan, Director of Public Works. Talmadge Frontage, who works in Parks and Recreation. Shannon LeCount, who is our Deputy Fire Chief. Myself. Jennifer Sixkiller, who's the staff librarian. And Nathan White currently are the individuals on the committee. And Nathan is in the street department. We've lost a couple of members through resignations and retirements. And so we are looking at potentially at least one more member, but the Kaleidoscope group will really shed some light on, I think, and inform how many more members we actually take on.
If I could add, that written list is on the copy of the plan that I passed out within the last month. It's on the last page if you want to refer to the written list.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Mayor? Mrs. Shelley?
Yes.
I was impressed. You went down the list of names and the departments they come from. So I was impressed with the diversity you have on your committee that's part of this and the departments they're working from. So you really reached out and got folks from all areas of the town. So kudos to you for that, for putting all that together.
Thank you.
That's great. That's great.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Compton. Commissioners, if there's no other comments or questions for Ms. Shelley, we'll move on to agenda item 6C, and this is in regards to Liberty Park Phase 2 design, and call on Chris Wyckoff.
Good morning.
Morning.
So what we have here really is an amendment to the contract that we have with McAdams Company. It's really kind of a rehash of some of the things that we've discussed. But what we're going to be doing is taking what is essentially conceptual plans and taking them into a biddable and construction document package. We arrived with McAdams from an RFQ process in last fiscal year in September. And you'll recall we brought the master plan forward and the amenities that go along with it at the board retreat in February. In follow-up discussions and with the estimate for the project in the relation to other capital projects, and we had discussions on phasing the project. If you'll go to the next slide. We heard some different ideas on phasing and alternates and how we would address that. The plan that we would have adopted to go forward with is to design all of the amenities in all pieces of it, but phase the project and bid the project as alternates, essentially from the areas from the hillside down, including the greenway connections, the stream restorations, all those pieces that we were kind of unsure about how they would fit into a timing piece. We can alternate those projects when we bid it and see what the market will bear at that time. The contract amendment for itself is for the actual construction document package, and that's for $509,465. You'll recall that the pre-design, the conceptual estimate for the project was about $7 million. So this gives us the options to design all the amenities and see what the market would bear, come up with further design and a much more dialed in estimate as to what the project will actually cost us. The plan is to have this all done by spring so that we have that package ready to go for us. And on Monday night, I'll be sharing a lot more of the conceptual imagery that we went through at the board retreat, showing the amenities, design pieces that we've all seen in the briefings and at the retreat beforehand.
Thank you, Chris. Any comments or questions, commissioners? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. The next agenda item is 6D. It's award of contract for Blythe Construction, and I'll recognize Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mayor. So we did decide to move forward early this year with with our resurfacing project. And so we put that out for bid a month or so ago. We're trying to really hit take advantage of some of the pricing we were seeing, of course, low gas tax and low gas prices. I believe we did that. We actually have a few more miles of streets. You notice there about 8.4 miles down on the streets we're resurfacing next year. Came in at our budget's around 1.2 million. You can see we were around 1.17 million. We actually had 8 bids total, but 3 of the bids were within about $1,000 of each other, if I remember, $1,000 to $1,500. So this is an awarded contract for our FY21 paving. You can see the list of streets over there on your right-hand side. They're also will be in the contract, and of course, you're on your agenda package. But I think it's going to be a really good program. Blythe Construction has not worked on ours before, but I've talked with them several times, and I think they'll really move and do a good job for us. So I'll take any questions.
Any comments or questions from
Mayor.
Mr. Young? Yes.
Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
they're actually paving, am I interrupting somebody?
No, you're on. This is you. Go ahead.
Okay. They're actually paving Broad Street now. Is that us? Are we doing that?
I mean, is that part of this? Is this part of the paving program for fiscal year 21?
Yeah.
John, is that part of it?
No, ma'am. That's actually this year, so we are overlapping a little bit. FY20 still going on for the 2020 paving. Maybe just completed that. They're about done with their project. So Culp Street, Main, all the streets being paved in town, and then Broad was one of those part of the 2020 paving. We wanted to get a jump start on 2021, trying to get those construction numbers a little better.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other comments or questions on agenda item 6D? Hearing none, we'll move on. 6E is a build grant agreement, and Mr. Young.
Yeah, so these two actually relate to each other. If we can talk about them together, if you can switch to the next slide, I would appreciate it, Genevieve. So these two agreements, or the two that we were just looking at, are the agreements. So this is the first step in our actual process for the build grant. Staff's been working with FHWA and NCDOT on these agreements for about the last few months. Just to be honest with you, we went through multiple drafts, but this is the final agreement. So this will allow us as a town basically to receive the $13.6 million from the FHWA or USDOT, whichever way you want to look at it, for the build grant for the East-West Connector. You can see the East-West Connector plan on your right-hand side there. And then the second agreement on there is the local agreement with NCDOT, and they do interrelate. We have to have the local agreement with NCDOT because they are our pass-through for the funding. So USDOT passes through NCDOT with funding, and then NCDOT also does review for the project. Just to kind of give you an idea what's going on right now. As soon as the town does, assuming this gets approved on Monday night, it will go to the USDOT. The USDOT agreement will. They will sign it. Actually, NCDOT signs first, and then finally USDOT. Subsequently, the NCDOT agreement, assuming it passes on Monday night, will be signed by us, and then the NCDOT. So that's the step after that. And then after that, we'll actually be able to start design. So all those things have to be in place before we can sign a contract with a consultant. So you see on my chart over there, a couple of steps that are going on in conjunction with this. We've got the final draft agreement to Norfolk Southern for the closure. So that'll be another piece that has to be done. And once that gets signed, we can continue to move forward, obviously, with this project. And then the last thing, as far as design goes, we have pre-qualified a firm, RK&K, out of Charlotte. We've actually met with them, went through an RFLOI, which is a letter of intent process. That's how the NCDOT does their projects. We pre-qualified them, had interviews, and we've actually already met with them in a pre-proposal meeting this past week, actually 2 days ago, and they're preparing their proposal, which I would envision being on the August agenda. So once that, I know that's a lot of stuff, and there's a lot to happen. I'll tell you, there's a lot that goes on in this process. There's a lot of steps that need to be followed, and they've got to be in place. Or if you get them out of line, you risk losing some of the reimbursement dollars. So that's why it is structured the way it is. That agreement for the USDOT, the NCDOT agreement, and then finally you'll have the design agreement with the consultant. So with that, I'll take any questions. I know it's a lot, but it is exciting. It's really exciting. It's just seeing all this.
Thanks, John. Any comments or questions for Mr. Young? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. John, and so you covered both of those items, consent item E and F. Just to clarify, commissioners, any comments or questions on E or F from Mr. Young? Okay, we'll go to the agenda item 6G. This is a conditional rezoning request for Reinhardt Road, and Mr. Wilson.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sure can.
Okay, thanks. So before you, on Monday night, will be a conditional rezoning for the property on Reinhardt Road. I know you've seen this property in the past. We do have a different type of presentation, so I do have the full presentation here for this one and the next one, just so you can be a little more familiar with it before Monday. But the applicant is MT Land. Again, you've seen this property before. There are two conditions with it. One is the concept plan, and the other are the TIA mitigation measures agreement. Next slide, please. So the property is about 114 acres. It is all along Reinhardt Road. The current condition is vacant with a couple of single-family homes. It is outside our corporate limits, but it is within the ETJ. Next slide, please. So it is currently zoned residential R2, which allows 2 units an acre for low-density residential uses. Next slide, please. Our future land use does have the entire property as neighborhood residential, with a desired density between 3 to 6 units an acre. Next slide, please. So one thing we're going to start doing is showing you the One Mooresville plan pages for the character and intent areas, so you can see this for the neighborhood residential. Next slide, please. So some specifics about this project: it is 339 units, all residential. It's 225 single-family homes, 114 townhomes, and that puts their density at 2.97 units an acre. This is a less intense use than you've seen in the past. They do have 33.8% open space, The minimum requirement is 20% open space, so they've drastically increased the minimum open space. So TIA mitigation measures, they are realigning Reinhardt Road. I wish I had, Jen, would you mind pointing to the realignment there? And you see that round circle, they are providing enough right-of-way for roundabout in the future. They are doing improvements to intersection with 115 and Reinhardt on the north side, as well as internal access improvements as well. Next slide, please. So again, you've seen this project a couple of times. I wanted to provide a brief history. Most recently, you saw their submittal. It was in 2019. I think it actually came to you in January of 2020, but that had 355 residential units. You can see the single family and townhome breakdown. The density was just a little bit higher than it is now. Before that one, you saw a submittal back in 2018 that had 472 units. The density was 3.83 units an acre. And of note, the townhomes were more numerous than single family homes in that submittal. So it was much heavier on the townhome side than single family side. So today, the difference, the dwelling units have been reduced by 17. This is compared to the 2019 submittal. The density has been reduced just slightly to 2.97 units an acre. And there was property included in previous submittals that was shown in the one Mooresville plan as mixed use corridor that have been removed from the plan. So the only property included in this plan are those on our future land use map showing as neighborhood residential. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at the analysis of the property and project, we look at the surrounding area, what kind of land use is currently in place. So this one is in a strange part of town. It has commercial, multifamily, single family, and vacant land. So it's sort of the transitional area of more intense uses to the south and the east, moving up to less intense uses to the north and the west. The one Mooresville plan, again, does have neighborhood residential, single family home, townhome, duplex, those sorts of things, 3 to 6 units an acre. And then access, this does have public road access on Reinhardt and is providing some major improvements to the road network to solve some transportation issues. Next slide, please. So we have had quite a few citizens come out in the past, citing several different issues. So I just wanted to touch on these as well. There have been discussions about environmental issues, and in the agenda packet, this is also a little bit different this time. You'll see some documentation. So the applicant provided us with documentation regarding their site testing to show there are no environmental issues, as well as traffic issues have been cited by residents. Again, the TIA mitigation measures agreement is included in your packet. I know Pecan Hills Development has, people from Pecan Hills have come out against the project, and the Homeowners Association provided a letter regarding what's going on in their development and things that they have addressed. And then, of course, the middle school construction. If you can see on the map, the pink little school symbol, that is the future middle school site. So middle school location with traffic and road improvements that are needed sort of ties into this project as well. That the mitigation measures for this project will help alleviate some traffic and transportation needs from that future project, as well as for this project. Next slide, please. So next steps, assuming approval, they would move forward with construction drawings at staff level. They are outside the town limits, so they would need to do an annexation request as well as a utility extension request. They would also need, of course, land disturbance permitting and building permitting through the county. Next slide, please. So during planning board meeting, we had 2 citizens speak against the project, and 1 citizen spoke neither for nor against the project. He was just providing what he thought were corrections to what other people had been saying. Staff did recommend approval to the planning board, and the planning board did recommend approval to the town board through a 5-2 vote. I'd be happy to answer any questions about that.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any comments or questions, commissioners? So just to let the whole board know, earlier this week, Commissioner Qualls and Commissioner Whittington and I met with school board member Roger Hyatt and Greg Whitfield, along with the administration from the school, Dr. Mooney and others, Mike Royal, get a better understanding of the school and what was planned for it. I think we were shown for the first time the actual school design. They're also even considering a future elementary school there, and just to make sure that we're all aligned and understand what the school's doing. Commissioner Qualls, do you have anything you want to elaborate on that meeting?
No, I thought it was a great discussion, and we'll, I think trying to plan for a contingency of that school makes it before this development. What are we going to do for transportation? So.
Yeah, and just one thing to point out is I know it's come up in the past about if Reinhardt Road is realigned. There's been questions in the past about, well, we want to guarantee that there's a light there. And I don't know, Mr. Young, can you address that? Because it was kind of insightful information about the TIA and how that impacts a possible future light at Reinhardt Road in 150.
Absolutely. So we did talk about that a little bit. The particular version of the TIA right now, which has been scaled down. Obviously, they're pulling a lot of units off of there. In the past, there was some, I think, some questions about the light and when that becomes, warranted or not. And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but the warrants on lights work a little differently. You want to make sure you've got the traffic there before you run the warrants on the light. So this particular TIA and MMA does not require the warrant. If they did not recommend it through the TIA process, it may be something that we would want to do down the road, but at either end, and this would be at any intersection. So, you wouldn't make recommendations again on a light until you actually have the traffic that builds and would create that warrant, particularly at the location. Like I say, any intersection, whether that's 115 and Reinhardt or 150 or wherever. Again, the other thing I would share as far as this, we talked about this before, moving the location of this actual intersection does actually give us the ability to put in a light. The light there, right, the actual intersection of Reinhardt Road and 150 right now is too close to the other intersections, so you don't even have that ability currently. You wouldn't want to put a light where Reinhardt comes out on the 150 right now. In fact, the DOT would never allow that with the separation requirements for from there and McClellan. So I think that's an important note that if we even, if we're entertaining a light down the road, if it does warrant that, it would this location that they're proposing would be one of the only options, or an option, I guess, for separation requirements.
Any other comments or questions for Mr. Young on that? And just a final note, the school did say that they were looking to open the middle school in the fall of 2023. And I think this proposed development in terms of its proposed completion would be 2025. And I think after they got 45 units is when that would trigger the road improvements. Okay, any other comments or questions on this agenda item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Say you talk to the school and y'all seen the design of the school. What kind of design did they say of infrastructure for road improvement? Thinking about buses and all that getting on. What did they talk about doing anything on 115 or Reinhardt Road at all?
Mr. Young, I'll let you address that.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Mayor. So they did present us, Commissioner Houston, with a very preliminary design. I want to be clear that design has not been brought to the town at all for a review or approval through sketch plan. So in this particular design that they showed us, again, I would call it a back of the napkin sketch. They did have their potential locations for their drives, which both of them come off of Reinhardt Road. But until they come in and actually submit a plan, that's when we would go through our TIA process that would make recommendations for improvements. The one thing we can do with the school system is we can require improvements wherever their access meet an existing road. You can't do off-site improvements for schools, but they can be required to put in things such as left turn lanes and whatever at the actual intersection. So we won't know what that looks like until we actually run the TIA process for them. And again, that won't happen until you get that plan in the door. We have asked them to be a party in their planning stage early on. So I actually have gotten an email back from Mr. Royal on that. So Danny and I are going to have a seat at the table, I think, as we move through this process to kind of, provide our input early on and through this process. I will tell you from my perspective, the two entrances they have off of Reinhardt Road, I do like their locations a lot better than what I thought they were going to end up with. It gives a lot of separation from 115 and 150, 115 and Reinhardt intersection. And it'll allow some of those cars not to interfere, I think, with the current traffic movements, especially on the bus routes. Well, I think they got a separation for their buses that would keep them out of that. We even talked with them about opportunities for directing traffic from their school. So, for example, only allowing movements right or left coming out of the intersection and directing them to, particularly say 115 or Reinhardt, depending on what the TIA comes out. But they were very open to that, and I think that's something we can work with them on as we go through this process. If that makes sense.
So the other part of that question is that with the school being the main issue on this project, they would do no improvement on 150 intersection in the Reinhardt Road and 115 on Reinhardt and 150 at all.
That we cannot require them to do that. Legislation does not allow us to do that. So the TIA could look at that, and it could make recommendations. Though recommendations could not be put on the school for them to be required to do that. That is not allowed in our current legislation.
I'm just basically concerned about the big buses coming off of Reinhardt Road with no improvement on the 115, trying to turn right or left into that traffic with our business park about a mile up the road. I'm just kind of concerned about all the traffic going back on Reinhardt Road. We're talking about traffic and trying to get on 150. They never go down Reinhardt Road to 150. They never get out down there. So, all right, thank you. That's all I need to know. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And Commissioner, just to address your concern about the current Reinhardt Road 150, they told us that they would not put buses going in and out of Reinhardt Road off of 150, that they would actually, any bus entrance, regardless of what happens on this development and any road improvements, that they would run all buses off of 115.
Oh, yeah.
So just because we did address that issue as well.
Yeah, I know when no bus will be going that way because you can't even drive a car up it right now.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, so that's kind of mandatory for that. All right.
Well, thank you, sir. Any other comments or questions on this agenda item 6G?
Mayor Atkins,
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Whittington?
I was pleased to know, and I don't know how many board members know this, but they are not going to have a bus garage there, because that, I think most people knew that from some time ago when they announced they would, but they're not, right?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
But they are planning for an elementary school on that site as well. Long term.
Right, but no bus garage. That would,
I didn't hear that.
be pretty important. Okay.
Okay, commissioners, we'll move on to the next agenda item. This is agenda item 6H, which is a conditional rezoning request at 2357 Statesville Highway. Mr. Wilson.
Yes, sir. So before you, Monday again is another conditional rezoning at 2357 Statesville. This is for a property going from single family R2 to RMXC, so it's residential mixed use with conditions. The condition for this would be the approved concept plan. Next slide, please. So the property is just over 7 acres. You can see along Statesville, then we have the train track. So the train track makes up the western property line. So the property access would be through Whitman Circle and Goodman Circle. Goodman Circle and Whitman Circle are both public roads. Whitman Circle would probably be the main access point because it's the closest to 115, and it does have a 30-foot right-of-way, so it is currently not up to town standards. Next slide, please. So again, currently it's R2. There is a corridor overlay, which really doesn't matter because of the train track in this particular case, but that just limits how close the development can be to 115 and provide some vegetative buffering along 115. But by right uses in R2, again, it's looking at low density residential at 2 units an acre. Next slide, please. So future land use designation for this property is neighborhood residential. Once again, we're looking for residential uses, lower density residential uses, 3 to 6 units an acre. The One Mooresville plan also talks about infill development, which this would fall under that category, to be guided by the context of the surrounding neighborhood. Next slide, please. So again, the One Mooresville plan under opportunities, at the top right, you can see infill development guided by context of the surrounding neighborhood and talking some other language about what we would look at moving forward with a project like this. Next slide, please. So specifics for this project, 115 is down on the bottom of your screen, so it is slightly different orientation than the maps. So they're looking to do a 48-unit multi-family development, which is 6.93 units an acre. They are providing the 20% open space. They're providing 84 parking spaces, which is above the 81 minimum requirement. They are doing improvements to Whitman Circle, but just along the property. So that's zoning ordinance requirement to do improvements along the property, improvements to a road frontage along the property, the road fronts. So they are not improving the entirety of Whitman Circle. Due to the size of the project, no TIA was required because it fell below the threshold of triggering a TIA. Next slide, please. So looking at this project, again, we're looking at the existing neighborhood and surrounding area for context. This area is dominated by single-family homes, a little bit larger lots. It's 1.4 units an acre right now is the existing neighborhood. The One Mooresville plan, again, looks at lower density residential, single-family home, 3 to 6 units an acre, and the infill development being guided by the existing neighborhood. Access, again, as I mentioned, is from Whitman Circle. Next slide, please. So again, if this project was approved, next steps for this one would be moving through construction drawings, which is with town staff, land disturbance permit, and building permitting with county staff. Next slide, please. So during our planning board meeting, we had 5 citizens speak against the project. Staff did recommend denial of this project to planning board, as we felt the project was inconsistent with the One Mooresville plan and incompatible with the existing neighborhood. Planning board did recommend denial of this project to the town board through a 6-to-1 vote. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the project.
Any comments or questions from Mr. Wilson?
Mayor, can I ask a question?
Commissioner Qualls and Commissioner Houston.
Just Danny, do you know, I can't see from the plans, is this going to be like a 3 or 4 story apartment building, or what, do they know yet?
It was 2 to 3 stories.
Thank you.
Commissioner Houston?
The question I had, if they had access to 115, would this project be a different looking project? Just cause it's coming out on Whitman Circle? Just a question. If the railroad track wasn't there, how would that project fit in?
That is a very good question. Maybe. So it still doesn't really fit the context, but it does alleviate the concern of routing all the traffic to an apartment complex through an existing neighborhood with a less than town standard sized road. So maybe, but
yeah,
probably not to the point of where we would recommend approval. But it would definitely help, I think, the compatibility with the existing neighborhood.
Well, just thought it come up, but just wanted to ask you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Any other comments or questions regarding this agenda item?
Yes, sir, Mayor. Please.
Commissioner Compton.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, you mentioned the area is not up to town standards right now. So when they come in and do the street or right-of-way improvements along the property, does that bring that area only up to town standards?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Just that number of how many feet that is. And the
Yes,
rest
sir.
of it coming in is not, and going beyond it is not. That is correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Compton. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, we'll move on. Okay, agenda item 6I is a conditional rezoning request at 459 and 461 Faith Road. Mr. Wilson?
Yes, sir. So this is the project you saw back on June 1st, and this presentation is the older style because I didn't want to update it since nothing has changed with this project. So this is for property along Faith Road. It's just over 33 acres, just under 34 acres. Again, going from residential R2 to single-family residential R3 with conditions. Next slide, please. So one Mooresville plan does have the property and the neighborhood residential. Future land use, same we've been looking at. The next slide, please. So this is a 77 lot, single family home development. The density is 2.32 units an acre. The TIA was required for this project, and the mitigation measures include reserving additional right-of-way along Faith Road, as well as interior road intersection standards, some left turn lanes on Faith into the development, and then the TIA assumed some base conditions were in place. And if those, so for instance, improvements to the intersection with 115 and Faith, if those are not done before this project has to pay for those, just so you're aware. Next slide, please. So staff did recommend approval of this conditional rezoning request. Next slide, please. Planning board also recommended approval of this rezoning request. And just so you know, I'm sure you all remember the applicant was unsure whether or not the project needed to be modified during the June 1st meeting. And the applicant has confirmed that that plan, the plan you just saw, the plan you saw June 1st, is the plan that they want to move forward with. So they are comfortable now moving forward with that plan. But I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have about this one.
Comments or questions, commissioners?
Yes, sir, Mayor.
Commissioner Compton?
Thank you, sir. I think Commissioner Dingler brought this up some time back when it was first being discussed. This development's right in a curve. And I think that was a concern pulling in and out of the neighborhood onto Faith Road at either entrance, blind spots, for instance. So has assurance has been made in that curve that you're going to have some site visibility regarding that, so you don't have any blind spots on that. For instance, nothing built too close to the road or open space back between the entrances so you can see better entering and exiting the neighborhood.
Yes, sir. That's part of the right-of-way dedication being provided that would allow for better site triangles.
Okay, that's my concern since this was first brought up in traveling that road and viewing it. I'm thinking, wow, what a crazy place. But as long as some site visibility has been talked about and improved, then okay. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioners, Mr. Wilson referenced that if certain road improvements were not made, that this development would be required to make those. Are you all familiar with those road improvements, and would you like for him to discuss those, or are you comfortable with the information that's been provided?
It'd be nice to refreshing everybody.
Okay.
I would like it also.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thanks, commissioners. Mr. Wilson, are you okay with that? Just to refresh everybody's mind about the planned improvements, and if they're not made, that this developer would be required to make those?
Yes, sir. I'd be happy to go over those now or provide the written document to you, whichever you prefer.
Commissioners, you want to hear it during the public hearing itself?
That'd be
That'll be
fine with
fine.
me.
It's okay with me, sir.
Be open.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Wilson? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just those images that you just went through, those are images of the proposed housing for this development?
Yes, sir. There's the applicant provided to show an example of what they were thinking about doing.
Okay. But because it's conditional, I mean, that's not, just the site plan is conditional, not the actual housing that they're showing, correct?
Correct, and we cannot require any architectural standards for single-family homes. The state does not allow us to do it, but they just wanted to show you a little bit of an example of what they're thinking. But that is correct. Site plan is the only condition in the TIA.
Okay, thank you. What's next? So we'll have the manager's report. Mr. Heeman, any comments on that?
No, sir.
Okay. Any new business would the board like to consider Monday night? You're certainly welcome to add it to the agenda. We got two commissioners that have something they want to discuss. Hearing none, then we'll go into closed session under consult with attorney. And you can see the 3 items listed under closed session. Any other updates? Commissioner Compton, you mentioned something about a game tomorrow or tonight.
Yes, Spinners baseball. Occupancy, the attendance has been limited to 25, and folks have masks, being social distancing. So there's plenty of room for the 25 people to spread out. And it is a special night, being Thirsty Thursday. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else, commissioners, anything else you want to bring up or share with the group for the greater good? Mr. Heyman, Ms. Sellers, Chiefs, anyone else?
I will say there's a working fire at Lark Glen. So we hope things go well there for those residences.
Okay, thank you. Well, commissioners, and everyone on this call, I hope everyone has a safe 4th of July weekend. And thanks for joining us. At this time, we'll go ahead and close out the agenda briefing, and we'll see you Monday night.